Achilles and Patroclus. OG queer couple or simply ancient romance? But first of all, who are these people? They are very important characters in ancient Greek mythology, especially Achilles, who is still presented today as the traditional male hero. We meet them in the context of the War of Troy, the most legendary war in Western tradition. To sum it up in a minute, Paris, Prince of Troy, goes to Sparta for a little vacation. When Sparta border control asks him work or pleasure, he's like, pleasure, definitely pleasure. Why? Because with the help of the goddess Aphrodite, he's gonna seduce Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, and will take her back to Troy. That's rude. Menelaus is furious. With the help of his brother Agamemnon, he rallies all the Greek kings, princes, heroes, and they head for Troy, whether they want it or not. Amongst them, there are our two boys, Achilles and Patroclus. Here, they besiege the city for 10 years. Troy seems indestructible. The only thing that keeps the Greeks going is that they have received a prophecy that says they are gonna win if and only if Achilles is fighting on their side. It's ancient Greece, so whatever the oracle says has to happen. Now, Achilles and Patroclus are always described as super close. According to some traditions, they were even brought up together. Things start to go south when Agamemnon, who is supposed to be the honorable leader of the Greeks, starts to behave like an actual man-child. So when these guys are fighting, looting, and pillaging all the nearby towns, charming, I know, they often take women as part of their prize, just because they can. Agamemnon takes one, Chryseis, and Achilles does two, Briseis. So they're both out. Then Chryseis' father, who is the priest of Apollo, goes to Agamemnon and he's like, please give me my daughter back. I'm literally begging you. Agamemnon is like, nah, she's too hot, sorry. But he's like, no, I'm the priest of Apollo. He complains with Apollo, who immediately sends a plague to the Greek camp. The Greeks are like to Agamemnon, dude, just give her up, we're dying over here. And he, being the absolute toddler that he is, it's like, fine, I'll give her up, but I'll take Achilles instead. He goes and steals Briseis from Achilles. And Achilles gets super mad, claiming he loved her, that she was basically like a wife to him. He's like super dramatic. From here onwards, Achilles refuses to fight. He just spends his time hanging out with Patroclus in his tent, playing the lyre, chilling, refusing to see anybody else. And now we should probably specify that Achilles has received his very own prophecy. The oracles must have been so busy back then. In this case, it's his mother, Thetis, that told him. And the prophecy says that he will bring victory to the Greeks, but that he will also die an honorable death at the walls of Troy. So far, he's been resigned to his destiny. He was like, I'm happy to go in a glorious way. Patroclus, you're my favorite person. Please take care of my son when I'm gone. Yes, Achilles has a son. But at this point, he's like, hang on a sec. I'm giving up my life for these losers that stole my girl slave? Now, Achilles and Patroclus are the epitome of opposites that complement each other. Achilles is strong, but very arrogant and prone to anger, while Patroclus is always described as kind and loving, which is almost a unicum in the Iliad that is filled with strong, ruthless heroes. You don't really get a lot of sweet, tender ones. So they're basically like spice and milk. The Greeks, of course, start losing because Achilles is not fighting. He's on strike, basically. He's sulking so much he must be a Scorpio. They go beg him to come back on the battlefield, but he's like, nah, Agamemnon disrespected me. I don't care about the Greeks. I don't care about the Trojans. I'm just happy to be here with Patroclus. But Patroclus, who is a softie, feels sorry for the Greeks being defeated. He wears Achilles' armor, pretends to be him, and joins the fight. Problem is that he gets killed by Hector, the strongest of the Trojans. When Achilles hears the news, he is devastated. He's done. His whole being is literally shattered. He stops eating, stops wanting to be. It really is one of the most touching passages from the Iliad. And very interestingly, he refers to Patroclus using the same language that Hector uses to talk about his wife. And I think that's very telling. Achilles requests that when he dies as well, he knows the clock is ticking, his remains be mixed with Patroclus in the same vase. He is for Achilles the polou Philtatos etairos, the companion that is most loved. This word, Philtatos, most loved or beloved, comes from the word philos, love. Now, I don't know if you know, but the Greeks were very particular with the word love. They had 8 to 9 names for it depending on its connotation. And this one, philos, is a love between family, friends, but also lovers. So what were they, friends or more than friends? This question has been hunting us for thousands of years. And when I say thousand, I literally mean thousands. The interpretation of their relationship is certainly open to debate, with interpreters that are more willing than others to read between the lines. But what's interesting to me is that the general consensus around it changes from one historical period to another, depending on the customs and belief system of the time. In simpler words, in periods of time where sexuality was experienced in a freer, less constrictive way, Achilles and Patroclus are seen as the epitome of homosexual love. In historical eras where heterosexuality is the only option, they are seen as comrades, friends, brothers united by a purely platonic love. They're just roommates. Now, who thinks what and why? If we strictly look at the text, Homer does not portray Achilles and Patroclus as lovers. Not explicitly, at least. But he also did very little to prevent the audience from assuming, to the point that the classical view during Antiquity, so during ancient Greece and ancient Rome, is generally that of same-sex love. I should make a whole video on sexuality in the ancient world, but when we look at ancient Greece specifically, there was the custom of paiderastia, from pais, boy, and erastes, lover. Basically, a same-sex relationship between a boy and an older man. It didn't have to be sexual, though it often was, but also intellectual, almost like a mentorship in a way. It had a social and educational value. Bottom line, no pun intended, gay was okay. Also, I shouldn't technically use modern labels such as gay. Sexuality was conceived in a much more fluid, less constrictive way back in the days. Iconic same-sex relationships that were considered iconic by the ancient Greeks themselves are Zeus with his cupbearer boy Ganymede, and, you guessed it, Achilles and Patroclus. Amongst the most prominent figures that recognize in Achilles and Patroclus a romantic or sexual relationship or both, we find playwright Aeschylus, the poet Pindar, and the philosopher Plato himself. Aeschylus literally brings them to life in his now unfortunately lost play, The Myrmidones. It's a full-on love story, just like Madeline Miller did thousands of years later. Aeschylus writes Achilles as a lover broken by grief, who's willing to do anything to avenge Patroclus. In a surviving fragment of the play, Achilles speaks of the reverent company of Patroclus's thighs and how Patroclus was ungrateful for many kisses. Plato takes it even further. In the Symposium, he presents them as divinely approved lovers, so their love literally had the blessing of the gods. But it's the statesman and famous orator Aeschylus that offers the most interesting take, I think. During his very own trial, he says that though Homer does not state it explicitly, educated people should be able to read between the lines. In his words, although Homer speaks in many places of Patroclus and Achilles, he hides their love and avoids giving a name to their friendship, thinking that the exceeding greatness of their affection is manifest to such of his listeners as are educated men. Basically, if you're not dumb, you're gonna read between the lines. The reason why he says listeners, by the way, and not readers, is because originally the Iliad and the Odyssey were not books, they were not written down. They were stories that were told orally. But already during ancient times, we have cultural figures with completely different views, most notably Socrates. Or should I say what Xenophon says Socrates said, since he didn't want to write a single thing. Supposedly he said that Achilles and Patroclus were strictly platonic, his words being, Achilles looks upon Patroclus not as the object of his passion, but as a comrade. It is no surprise that Xenophon himself has the same view, and says they were chaste and devoted companions. So we already see a little bit of a debate developing already in ancient times. I think it's very telling that when Alexander the Great and his friend, perhaps more than friend, Hephaestion, passed through Troy during the Asian campaign, they honored the sacred tomb of Achilles and Patroclus in front of their entire army, and that this is taken as an obvious declaration of their own relationship. I mean, the joint tomb and Alexander's action show how their relationship was perceived in popular culture at the time. If you're curious to know more about Alexander, I just posted about him, and I will definitely make a video about him and Hephaestion. The debate obviously continues through modern times and all the way to contemporary times, with views like Shakespeare's that paints them as lovers in the eyes of the Greeks, and many modern takes that only recognize in it the strongest form of friendship and camaraderie, free of any any form of sexuality or romanticism. So both in ancient and contemporary time, we find many different voices. Some think it's a pederastic relationship, some a purely homosexual relationship free of any form of hierarchy, and in this case you might have heard of the Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, and some see in it a strong affection between male friends, a true friendship between companions made even stronger by the shared experience of war. And if this take sparks your interest, go read Achilles in Vietnam. Jonathan Shea really paints it as a tale of camaraderie and brotherhood. There are critics that point at the fact that Achilles was clearly attracted to women for the whole fight over losing his slave girl Briseis, but I'm not even going to address that because, as I said before, sexuality was conceived in a much more fluid way. And again, we also have classicists that say, hey, I'm strictly looking at the text here. There is no explicit hint to a gay love story, so identifying the pair as homosexual is reinventing Homer. Bottom line, we will never know. And I'm not even sure that's what we should focus on. These two clearly had something special, regardless of what name we want to give it. And once again, this urge to label things is a very modern concept. It was not as much of a necessity back then. They had something so unique and so strong that we're still here talking about it thousands of years later. I want to finish this by letting the actual text speak, so you can form your own opinion perhaps. I think that Patroclus was so dear to Homer himself, to the author. Homer wasn't an actual one person, but I can't get into that right now. Why do I think that? A, because he often addresses him directly, speaking directly to him. And B, because Patroclus acts as a motor of the plot when the plot reaches a potential standstill. Achilles is done fighting. No Achilles, no action. No action, no plot. Achilles is done with both sides, Greeks and Trojans, to the point that he prays Zeus and says, I don't want any of them to escape death. None of the Trojans and none of the Greeks, but that only us two escape destruction, and the two of us alone might untie the sacred veils of Troy. Whatever you want to call it, whatever form it might have taken, this was love. Maybe fraternal, maybe romantic, maybe not, but it was love. Now we know Achilles' prayer unfortunately falls on deaf ears, and Patroclus' death allows for the plot to move forward. Achilles, broken by pain, blinded by anger, steps back on the battlefield and carries the story to an end. Later, speaking to his mother, the nymph Thetis, he says, what pleasure can I feel now that my dear companion is dead, Patroclus, whom I honored above all my companions, just as mine own self. They're literally one thing. He even goes as far as saying, I couldn't suffer greater misfortune, not even if I knew my father is dead or my son is dead. When it comes to Achilles and Patroclus, I like to talk about love. Whether you think it was a romantic love, a sexual love, or simply one of those strong, eternal friendships that bleed into brotherhood. Whatever it might be, it is love. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments. Achilles and Patroclus is one of the most touching stories in ancient Greek mythology. A bond so strong to survive the test of time for millennia and still fill the reader or the listener with awe to this day. It's a story of braveness, loyalty, sacrifice, and tragedy that mixes and intertwines into a tapestry of eternal love.